Welcome to the Healthy Brain Toolbox. I'm Dr. Ken Charlin, neurologist and host for this show. In each episode, I interview influential people whose work impacts how we live and how we think. My guests are leaders in the health and fitness industry, physicians, scientists. Here you'll find conversations that break down barriers, expand your horizons, and give you the tools you need to protect your health and nourish your aging brain. Welcome to the Healthy Brain Toolbox podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Charlin. Our guest today is a sixth-generation Iowan, a dedicated public servant, and a champion for working families. Zach Wahls first captured the world's attention in 2011 as a 19-year-old college student when a video of his powerful testimony before the Iowa House in defense of his two mothers' marriage went viral, becoming one of the most watched political clips in history. Since then, Zach has turned that advocacy into action. An Eagle Scout and author of My Two Moms, he earned his master's in public affairs from Princeton before being elected to the Iowa State Senate in 2018. He rose quickly to serve as a Senate Minority Leader, where he has been a vocal advocate for healthcare access, affordable housing, and rural development. Now he's bringing that fight to the national stage as a candidate for the United States Senate. We're here to discuss his journey from a viral advocate to a legislative leader and his vision for the future of healthcare in Iowa and across the nation. Zach, welcome to the Healthy Brain Toolbox.
It's great to be here. It's a very generous introduction, and I'm really excited for the conversation today.
I've known Zach for many years. It's been a real honor to watch him. We probably first met back in about 2016 or so about 10 years when I'm in Princeton, my hometown, and knowing him through his mothers, Jackie and Terry, who are dear friends. I'm so honored that he time out from his political campaign to join us.
So there's some people who get really particular about the senator title, and it's never been about the title. I know it's obviously an honorific and reflects people's trust. And it's funny, actually, you mentioned in the intro, I was elected in 2018, the same year I finished my master's at Princeton. Fun little fact is that my graduation day for my program was actually the exact same day as the primary election, and I had a competitive four-way Democratic primary. And so the joke that I told 100 times on the campaign trail that first race was, I won't be able to walk, but I am able to run. And folks were still chuckling at it on the night we won the race.
Well, that's wonderful. I like to do a bit of an origin story. So take us back to 2011. You're a college student speaking about your family. In that moment, did you see yourself as a future politician, or were you simply a son defending his home?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. That 2011 speech was obviously what kind of catapulted me into the limelight, so to speak. But for me, the story really starts with my two moms. I mentioned Jackie, Terry. My mom, my biological mom, Terry, grew up on a family farm in northeastern Iowa, up in the Driftless region, Clayton County, right along the Mississippi River. And growing up, she always knew that she was a little different. And it wasn't until she was in college at Drake University in Des Moines where she figured out that she was a lesbian woman and came out to her parents a little after that. And then I was actually born in 1991. My mom, Terry, was practicing medicine at the Marshfield Clinic in central Wisconsin, and then met my mom, Jackie, a few years after that. I was one of the earliest part of a generation of young people born to openly out LGBT parents. Being a single woman trying to start a family, living in central Wisconsin in the late 1980s, not an easy time or place to do that, but she was able to find great fertility clinic and a sperm bank from Fairfax, Virginia that was willing to work with her. And not everybody was willing to do that at that time. And then we moved back to Iowa when I was 8 years old. My mom had gone to medical school at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. And so it was a bit of a homecoming for her. And one of my most vivid memories, Ken, is as I was in the 8th grade, watching the 2004 Republican National Convention for a social studies assignment that year. And the assignment was to watch the speeches and then report back the next day in class. And I will never forget what it was like watching very powerful political figures, men in our country, talk about the war that was raging at that time, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the global war on terror. and then in the next breath, warn about this radical state Supreme Court decision from Massachusetts that had, for the first time in our nation's history, recognized marriage equality for same-sex couples, like my parents, and the
Right.
realization that they're talking about my family as that, eighth grade, the 13-year-old student it was a shocking and very frankly, very scary realization. And that I still remember that next day, went into class, I'd taken notes. I'm still a very scrupulous note taker here. And I wanted to speak up and to say something. I was afraid, frankly, and I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of somehow making myself even more of a target. It wasn't a secret that I had gay parents, but leaning into that or defending your family at that age, it's not something that I felt like I was able to do. And that was exactly why, as a sophomore at the University of Iowa, myself studying civil and environmental engineering, when that opportunity came around again in 2011 to go speak up and to defend my family from politicians in Des Moines who were trying to use my parents' marriage as this wedge issue to divide our state, to pit us against each other over something as simple as family. I felt like at that time I had the courage, I had the ability to go be that advocate that as a 13-year-old I didn't see on the television. And so I knew that I had to go. And when I gave that speech, it was a short 3-minute testimony about what marriage equality had meant to my family, the commitment that my family had made to work through the hard times so we could enjoy the good ones. And as you obviously know, Ken, and we can get into later, my family's been through plenty of hard times and come out on the other side. And when that opportunity presented itself, I just thought back to that eighth grade Zach and how disappointed he would be in college sophomore Zach if I didn't go speak up and do the right thing. And I was frankly as shocked as everybody else, I think, when the video of that went viral. It was not something, frankly, that we were prepared for. My parents both working in medicine, going viral means something very different in your line of work than it did for us. But thankfully, we had support of close family friends and many others who came forward to help us navigate both the opportunity, but also the challenge of that experience. I just got a firsthand lesson that when you do find the courage to speak up, to share your story, to be that voice, that it inspires a lot of other people to join you and to find that courage themselves. And so as a result, I spent several years doing advocacy work across the state and then ultimately across the country, trying to win hearts and minds from people with whom we may have had some disagreements, but I knew that we had a lot in common too. And that's one of the, I think, the kind of the signature, one of the lessons for me of that experience was that when even if you look at things differently, if you try to find that common ground, the shared values, you're willing to meet people where they are, treat them with respect, bring some grace and some humility to that conversation, you can go a heck of a lot further than some of the pundits might think, because there is still so much more that unites us than divides us.
So much agree. And as you're saying this, one of the things I think about is this general perception about this wonderful democratic process that we have, that despite the fact that it's by the people, for the people, that democratic change generally tends to be slow and generally tends to be a 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, et cetera, as different political administrations gain power and sometimes undo what the previous administration did or attempt to, and so forth. What I'm saying by that is, if we talk to a young person today and just ask them at the gut instinct level, their feeling about gay marriage in general, I have a feeling the younger generation would look at us bewildered and say, well, yeah, what do you mean? That's not different than any other person getting married. And yet this change really in reality happened in such a relatively short period of time. I think when Obama was elected president in the first administration, and they were debating about don't ask, don't tell, and I don't know about marriage. And yet here we are in 2026, and it is a totally different situation. And all I mean by that is, regardless of the subject, rights and gay marriage or healthcare access, that sometimes the system kind of works. Sometimes things can happen and they don't have to take 50 years to see.
Yeah, I think that our founding fathers had tremendous wisdom and foresight. And we're celebrating this year the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Of course, a decade or so later, they would pass the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I think it's a tremendous I think just opportunity for all of us who call America home or who look up to American values and ideals. Just take some time this year in particular to celebrate and to look back at some of those founding documents, those first principles that our founders put forward. They were, of course, imperfect men, but they had tremendous wisdom, tremendous foresight. The system of government that they laid out in those founding documents certainly looks a lot different today than it did 250 years ago. And I'm sure that there are a lot of things that are true about the modern world that would seem totally alien or unforeseeable to them at that time. But that's precisely the beauty of what was in our Constitution, in that Bill of Rights. The words that are written in our Declaration of Independence was a forward-looking vision for the progressive realization of human rights, of the universal rights of man, as they talked about at that time, the continual work of perfecting our union, which certainly was not perfect then, is not perfect now. But I think that commitment and that willingness to move forward is something that is really important. I do think it is worth, of course, saying that even though it's, I think, to a lot of folks outside of the LGBT advocacy space, the progress on marriage equality felt almost lightning speed to go from Massachusetts in 2004 to the Supreme Court Obergefell decision in 2015. There was an enormous amount of work that happened before that first Supreme Court decision in 2004. Iowa then was actually the third state in the country to recognize same-sex marriage. And I would also just tout our horn a little bit. We are the first state in the country for it to be a unanimous decision by our state Supreme Court, which was pretty special for Iowa. And again, the reason the court here in Iowa held that ruling unanimously was because of the words that the founders of this state wrote into our Constitution. And so I think that from our perspective, there's certainly an appreciation for, on the one hand, how quickly social progress can happen, but on the other, the fact that it requires a lot of people working really hard, thinking really strategically to make those changes and that progress a reality.
It's wonderful. Time for a brief message from one of our sponsors. Do you ever find yourself struggling with brain fog, memory lapses, or that mid-afternoon crash? Maybe it's difficulty focusing, mental fatigue, or even the early signs of cognitive decline. These can all be signals that your brain isn't getting the fuel it needs. That's why I recommend Keto 5, a breakthrough in targeted brain nutrition. Their supplements, Exo Genius and Exo Ultra, are scientifically designed to support focus, memory, and long-term brain health. Exo Genius delivers a rapid boost in ketone levels, giving your brain clean, sustained energy for hours, without sugar, without carbs, without the crash. Exo Ultra goes deeper, providing a pure beta-hydroxybutyrate formula to help you achieve effective ketosis for sharper focus and stronger mental clarity. But it's more than energy. Research shows that ketones can reduce neuroinflammation, protect brain cells, and support mitochondrial health, key defenses against conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Imagine clear thinking, better memory, and a brain that thrives, not just today, but for years to come. Fuel your mind, protect your future. Visit drcharlens.com/collections/keto5, KETO5, to learn more and get started today. You've spoken about your mother Terry's journey with MS and how your mother Jackie was a union nurse with your family's stability. And I'm wondering how witnessing that intersection of chronic illness and safety net and contract shaped your worldview as a politician.
It's interesting. It's actually a direct extension of the conversation that we were just on, because I think if you look at the kind of sweep of American history, obviously economic security and social progress do not always go hand in hand, but more often than not, I think, in just generally speaking, people are more willing to consider new ideas and to embrace social change when they feel that economic security. And I don't think it is a coincidence that when we saw during the latter half of the 20th century a more broad-based economic prosperity, a very strong middle class, that we saw pretty rapid social change during that time, the baby boomer generation. And she was diagnosed when I was only 8 years old. And watching her battle that disease certainly influenced my understanding. And you think about how these different parts of our identities intersect, seeing how my parents sometimes were treated differently because they were a same-sex couple, and other times treated differently because my mom, Terry, was spent several years in an electric tilt recline wheelchair. And the fact that at different times their relationship was not treated the same way or with the same respect or recognition that my own wife now and I enjoy in our relationship. It certainly made a very strong impression on me as a young person and helped me understand that the experience that my family was going through was not quote unquote normal. Although I think honestly, normal is just really a word we use to describe somebody who we don't know very well. There certainly are more normal, quote unquote, right, families or identities in the world. And as a result, in an appreciation that even though someone may have a different upbringing than you or different experience than you or different family than you, that doesn't make that their experience or their life or their family any less valid or worthy of recognition than your own. And during my time in the legislature, I've been serving now as my 8th year. I've always sought to be a champion and a voice and an advocate on behalf of people who may sometimes fall outside what we consider the norm, but who nonetheless deserve the same rights and protection under the law, recognition from their neighbors, our state lawmakers, as anybody else. And whether that's been as a champion for Iowans who are being preyed upon by predatory investment companies, whether that's been people who need someone to speak up on their behalf because they're facing discrimination under the law or these very circumstances. I've certainly tried to live those values because they were the values that I was raised with.
Wonderful. I think of Iowa in general, the bellwether state, not just because the caucus is so early in the presidential election or primaries, but I've spent time in Iowa. I've ridden through across the state on very rural state, obviously, but some beautiful urban centers, Des Moines, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, et cetera. And you've represented both urban and rural swing counties like Cedar County. When I think about national politics, I always think one of the challenges, particularly I think on the Democratic side of the ticket, has been this ability to bridge these blue collar, more urban values of the union member and the rural values that characterizes so much of middle America. And they're not necessarily different, of course, but how getting people to communicate together, communicate, and how to help folks realize that we're all on the same journey together. That's probably the bigger challenge, and make sure that everyone is being heard. And I'm wondering what you've learned about, because we've already talked about unanimous votes in the Iowa State, in the House and State Senate, Iowa. What have you learned about finding common ground on kitchen table issues like grocery prices or healthcare costs in this very politically divided state?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I will tell you, I feel really fortunate to have represented the Senate district that I have for these last 8 years. When I was first elected in 2018, my Senate district included 3 different counties: Johnson County, which is where I live and where I was raised, which, as you said, is a more kind of progressive. Iowa City is a college town. I live next door in Coralville, which is a more suburban community. But I also had rural parts of Johnson County, as well as Cedar County and a slice of Muscatine County, both of which are much more rural, small town areas. Both counties that voted for Barack Obama in 2012, Donald Trump in 2016, and for Zach Wahls in 2018. And the way that I was able to win in those counties and what I learned representing them is that when you show up, when you're able to build relationships, develop a real understanding of the issues and the challenges that are facing those communities, the exact same way that I was able to win hearts and minds as an advocate for my family several years earlier, people are often very willing to meet you where you are as well. And again, even though the largest community in Cedar County is a town of Tipton. It's the county seat, has 3,200 people and 1 stoplight. Even though life in Tipton is certainly different than it is in Coralville, many of the challenges that we see in Tipton are not so different from what we see here where I live. We see, as you mentioned earlier, rising cost of living, wages that have been growing much slower than the cost of everyday necessities. We see challenges around childcare, challenges around the cost of nursing homes, challenges around public education, some of these things. And so in my experience, that what people are really looking for is not, do you have a 10-point plan to fix every single problem in your life, but do you understand the challenges that people are going through? Do you understand the fears that they have about the future? Do you understand the hopes and the dreams that they have for their kids, for their grandkids? And I've always worked really hard to do that, to bring that work with me. What I would tell you is that as I look around at what's happening in Iowa and frankly across our country right now, I think one of the things that is the most concerning is the fact that we have seen just massive consolidation in industry after industry in our economy. We have seen a growing amount of corporate power that is then on the other side of the equation politically is used to preserve a status quo that increasingly benefits people at the very top of our society to the detriment of the rest of us. And of course, there are always going to be differences in wages and salaries based on the amount of training that a physician or an engineer or an attorney requires. But we see today just this massive amount of income and wealth being concentrated among the very wealthiest people in our society, and then using that wealth to continue to expand their power, their influence, their control over the economy, over our politics. I have seen that play out firsthand in the state legislature. We can all obviously see it happening in Washington, D.C. And even though there's certainly no doubt that the smartphones and the laptops that we have today are much fancier and better than they were 20 years ago, I think there are a growing number of Americans who really do not feel as though the life for their kids or their grandkids is going to be better than the one that they had growing up. And so as a lawmaker, as a political leader, I see it as my responsibility to ensure that people who have those concerns are able to articulate them, to bring them to our political process, so that we can figure out, as you mentioned earlier, through that sometimes slow moving, sometimes frustrating, sometimes 3 steps forward, 2 steps back process, how we actually do build a better future for our state and for our country.
Off script on my planned questions, but I am a second generation American. My grandfather joined his father, who had come ahead of him by a few years, to establish a footprint in Trenton, New Jersey, where he owned a baby carriage business he started and was sending money home to the family. And then when they saved enough money, brought his wife and the rest of the children by ship through Ellis Island to make a better life for themselves. And eventually, my grandfather took over that business. It was around the time of the Depression, somehow morphed it into a retail lighting business, and then we turned it into a national lighting company called Charlin Light Corporation. And it was a very moving experience for me to visit Ellis Island and to feel the energy of the people that came through those doors, traveling thousands and thousands of miles with all they had in a suitcase and with hope to make a better life for themselves. And I think that's so important. I don't know what the immigrant story is today. I'm not trying to focus on any one group at all, but just to make the broader generalization, are we still the land of hope and opportunity, coming to our country to make a better life for themselves and for society as a whole?
I can hear it in your voice, Ken, and I feel certainly the same way. Virtually every family in this country, unless you're from a Native American background, has an immigration story of some kind. My family, I'm the 6th generation Iowan. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, he came to this country and did not speak a word of English, fled a war-torn and politically turbulent Germany at that time, settled in Northeast Iowa, which was at that point, there were a lot of people in that county who did not speak a word of English. There were multiple German newspapers. But he had, the same way that you just articulated about your family, come to this country seeking a better life, more opportunity, at tremendous personal cost. His first wife died during the voyage to America, and they faced enormous challenges, both getting to this country and then building their own life, their own future in this country. And again, I think that is something that speaks to so many people. And this was in the late 1800s, and whether it was in the 1800s, 1700s, 1900s, or even today, America for so many people around the world has been that shining beacon, the shining city on a hill that President Reagan invoked from John Winthrop many years earlier. And I think even though we are in a really hard time right now, and there are a lot of people who are concerned, as they should be, about things that we see happening in our state, in our country, I'm 100% convinced that there is nothing that is wrong with this country that cannot be fixed by what is right with this country. And even though we are facing enormous challenges, I just talked about the concentration, the economic forces in this country. We also see on the algorithms that some of these tech companies control. I think that there is really they have this benefit essentially from us being glued to our screens and scrolling, and they're optimizing for attention and frankly divisive arguments and polemics that get made in those news feeds. Even though we have all of these challenges, I know that we can work through them. I know that our best days can be ahead of us. It does not mean that it will be easy or that it will not come without tremendous struggle or hardship along the way. But in the same way that your ancestors, just like mine, fought to make that better life for their kids and their grandkids, I know without any doubt in my body that the people who are rising to that work again today will be able to be successful if we have the right people and the right conviction among all of us.
Since this is the Healthy Brain Toolbox podcast, let's talk healthcare. Maybe a little anecdote. You led a significant effort to protect residents' mobile home parks from predatory private equity firms, and wondering how that struggle for housing security relates to the overall health and mental well-being of Iowans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think been a growing conversation around social determinants of health and the impacts that your personal situation has on your health and your well-being. Housing is certainly one of those. Income, of course, another one. Many other factors. My mom, Terry, is well known for her work around the use of diet and nutrition, some other lifestyle factors on influencing health outcomes. And so I certainly have, I think, probably more intimate understanding than many lawmakers do about how important all of those are. When I was a freshman legislator, this was in 2019, we saw this surge in out-of-state investment companies coming into Iowa, purchasing manufactured housing communities, trailer parks, and then increasing the monthly lot rent that those residents pay to live in those communities by increases that I thought were just frankly shocking. You're talking 50%, 60%, 70% increases in some cases from one month to the next. If my mortgage went up 70% from June to July, my wife and I would be in a really serious challenge. And that's certainly true for Iowans across our state when they saw these increases in their housing costs. It was a very powerful experience for me to see. We did have the ability to get legislation through the Senate where I serve that would have extended some basic protections under the law to my constituents and to our neighbors across the state who were, as I certainly saw, the victims of these predatory companies. Unfortunately, when that bill was sent over to the House of Representatives, because it has to pass through both chambers, that was where we ran into a lobbyist who was able to get one state representative as a favor to him to kill that bipartisan legislation that I passed through the Senate 48-0. It was unanimously passed. And then a state representative killed that bill. And I was actually in the room. I was in the meeting. I watched this happen with my own eyes. It was very powerful, a learning experience of how kind of politics works. It certainly didn't work for my constituents. Incidentally, Ken, the woman who killed that bill in 2019 was a state representative named Ashley Hinson. Today, she is now a congresswoman representing Northeast Iowa, and in all likelihood, she will be my Republican opponent for the general election this November. So when we talk about the connection between how these powerful forces economically in our country have actually been able to benefit and corrupt our political process through a campaign finance system that is so driven by money, both in the lobbying side and on the campaign side, I got a very powerful education in that just as a freshman lawmaker. And that is one of the reasons why throughout my career, I've really championed a campaign finance reform that would try to significantly reduce the massive influence that currently exists in our process for the wealthiest and the most well-connected, because it is ultimately those of us who have to live with those consequences who really do pay the price. We see it play out in health. We see it play out in educational outcomes. We see it play out in our ability to build an economically secure livelihood for ourselves, for our families, for our kids. And it has to change because when we think about the challenges that we are facing as a country, so many of them come back to, like I said earlier, this increased concentration that we have seen, the fact that we have some of these big companies doing better than ever, more people who have made the amounts of money that accrue at the very top of our economy are almost hard to fathom. Look, I'll be really clear. Like, I've been a small business owner. I believe that free enterprise and competition and markets can lead to really good things for consumers. So I don't begrudge people for trying to start a business or anything like that. But when you look at how much influence these massive corporations have on our political process and how entrenched these interests are, I think that there is a very deep connection between what has happened in our economy and the corruption of our politics by our current campaign finance system. That's why that has become a real focal point of our campaign. And I'll tell you, Ken, too, we've been to 66 of Iowa's 99 counties. We've held over 250 campaign events. Actually, just yesterday morning, we turned in our nominating petitions to get onto the ballot in June for the Democratic primary. By law, we need to collect 3,500 from across the state. We collected over 10,000. I was particularly proud that of the 10,000, 15% of those petitions were signed by registered Republicans and independent voters. And that is because our message about what is happening in the economy, what has happened to our politics, is really resonating with a broad coalition across the political spectrum of Iowans who we may not agree on every single issue, may have different views about things like reproductive rights or immigration or public education. But we can agree that what has happened in our economy is unacceptable. What is happening in our politics is unacceptable. And we have to elect leaders who have the courage to fight that corruption head on and really push for real change in the Congress and the U.S. Senate.
Now it's time for a short commercial break. Imagine a future where brain health is not just managed but optimized, where the symptoms of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, stroke, depression, anxiety, and even long COVID can be addressed with cutting-edge technology. That future is here with the Neuronic Light and the Neuronic 1070 nanometer photobiomodulation helmets, a breakthrough in non-invasive brain therapy. Using near-infrared light, these devices penetrate deep into brain tissue, stimulating cellular repair, reducing inflammation, and enhancing mitochondrial function. Research suggests this technology can even enhance cognitive performance in healthy individuals, all without drugs or invasive procedures. The Neuronic 1070 helmet takes it further, offering 4 customizable operating quadrants, ideal for tailoring programs in conditions like stroke or traumatic brain injury. And with every 1070 helmet, you'll receive a free 30-minute brain health consultation to help you maximize the benefits. Whether you want to support memory, restore energy, or take proactive control of your brain health, Neuronic technology could be the game changer you've been waiting for. Unlock the power of light, heal, restore, thrive. Learn more at neuronic.online. And when you make that investment, be sure to use the code Charlin100 with a capital S to get your $100 discount, and let Neuronic know where you heard about this valuable technology. So if we frame, because I know you have healthcare as a human right, I'm curious how this plays into it. Is the economy of healthcare sort of the problem, and how it's driven by power, from your perception, by powerful organizations? How does this impact things that are close to your heart? Rural hospital closures, maternal healthcare crisis issues. What's going on here? Is it money and powerful corporations, or what other factors are playing a role?
Healthcare is a perfect illustration, frankly. I think some of the broader trends in the economy, consolidation being one of those. There's obviously been a massive amount of consolidation in the healthcare space over the last 50 years. You've seen huge amounts of private equity money move into the space, consolidate practices, clinics, hospital systems. You've seen that happen now as well on the payer side, with fewer and fewer massive insurance carriers increasingly having disproportionate influence. As you mentioned earlier, closures to rural healthcare systems. So the Medicaid cuts that were passed last year, the big, beautiful bill, which was what really was a big bill. There's no doubt about it. It touched on a lot of different things. One of the single largest things that it did was it cut $800 billion, it's billion with a B, from our Medicaid system. This is the public health insurance option for low-income Americans. And one of the things that has been starting to happen as a result of that budget is that the providers in rural places, whether it's in a rural setting, and in some cases in urban settings too, that provide these services, critical access hospitals, federally qualified health centers, have seen Medicaid funding start to dwindle as a source of their revenue stream. before Medicaid's directed payments system kicked in, this is several years ago, about 60% of Iowa's rural hospitals and clinics were operating at a structural deficit. They were operating in the red with a very uncertain political or financial future. And when that directed payment system came online, that was a real lifeline. Actually, we've toured now multiple rural hospitals, and the phrase that keeps being used is salvation. Medicaid's program was our salvation. And with these cuts that my Republican opponent, Ashley Hinson, voted for, we've already started to see more of those hospitals go into the red. We've seen hospital systems, clinics announce closures. And I think that there are a lot of Iowans who, even if you are not on Medicaid, and I think this is a really important point, even if your health insurance is not through Medicaid, your providers, those systems depend on Medicaid as a major source of revenue to keep the doors open. And so even if your health insurance is not what's being cut, the system that you rely on, the provider that you rely on, their operations are now in jeopardy. And that was a policy choice that was a part of this bill in order to pay for the extension, like I said earlier, of massive tax cuts for that overwhelmingly benefit the wealthiest Americans in our society. And so I'm not someone who, again, thinks that we should have socialist, communist country or anything like that. However, I do think it is reasonable to expect the people who have benefited the most from America's prosperity and opportunity to pay their fair share, and that we can use those resources to ensure that no person who lives in this country is unable to get the healthcare access that they need. And so from my perspective, there are a multitude of issues facing our healthcare system. And as many people have pointed out, it's often not really a healthcare system. It's a sickness management system, right? But I think certainly those are some of the biggest challenges that we've seen is increased consolidation, defunding of these really essential services. Don't get me started on prescription drugs, but I guess we can talk about those too. But there's so many different places where we see these trends playing out in healthcare
Are there
that are
bright
concerned.
spots for you, Zach? Are there some examples, community health centers, physician-led initiatives that as really shining examples that you would say scale should you be elected?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the answer is that there is certainly lots of innovation that is happening, is exactly what you just said, often physician-led, provider-led services. I'll give you one really concrete example. Here in my own community, the junior high school that I went to, I had the opportunity to see a woman who was a part of my church growing up, Dr. Oding. I was able to help actually start a clinic in that school to get kids who are on Medicaid. I was the Hawkeye program, CHIP, was able to get those kids services in a school setting, so they didn't have to make a separate appointment at a doctor's office. Their parents might not be able to get them there. They're able to get regular checkups, support that they needed in that kind of setting. We've certainly seen more and more places where that innovation is happening. And it is one of the things that I've learned, Ken, in my time in government, is that most of the best ideas do not start at the State House. They start with people who are in the field, people who are innovating, who have the flexibility, the resources to try new things. Not every single one of them is going to succeed, but that's the nature of science and innovation, right? Is that you have plenty of things that don't go the right way before you do find something that really works. And at its best, what government is able to do is help make that innovation possible, to support that innovation when it occurs in the private sector, and help bring it to scale across the state, across the country. And I think the fact that we've seen less and less of that as a priority is certainly cause for some real concern. I'll just give you one really concrete example. So Doge, Elon Musk, got certainly a lot of attention last year when that initiative got going. And when we were in Southwest Iowa, this was late last year, we were visiting a community that had been devastated by flooding just a year earlier. There have been some ongoing challenges over the previous several years. One of the ways that they've been building back from that was through a grant program called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Our Communities, or BRIC, B-R-I-C. And weeks before that meeting, they had submitted a grant proposal as a part of that program, had been told that they had been selected to receive that funding. And then the funding was put on indefinite hold because apparently Doge had flagged this program for further study because it had the word resilient in the title, even though resilient referred to the infrastructure, not to some kind of quote unquote DEI concept or the problem. And I just thought that was such a perfect illustration of how decisions that are made in DC can sometimes have very negative consequences that affect people far beyond what those policymakers realize.
Let's touch on, it said pharmaceutical companies or pharmaceutical, don't get me started. In the U.S. Senate, you'd be up against massive pharmaceutical and insurance lobbies, and wondering how you plan to position yourself as an advocate for the patient without being buried in that establishment interest that you've already.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another good story in contrast here. My Republican opponent, Ashley Hinson, has accepted millions of dollars over her career from insurance, pharmaceutical companies, and executives. And I made a promise very early in this campaign that we were not going to accept or solicit money from corporate PACs, which are the vehicle that are often used to funnel those contributions, because I think that my constituents deserve to know that they have a senator who's working for them and not just for their campaign donors. One of the things that has really come to my attention serving in the state Senate, and again, representing small town and rural Iowa, is the profound impact that pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, have had on especially a lot of rural, independent, small town pharmacies. If you look at a map of the state of Iowa and you just put a little dot where a community has lost a pharmacy, small town pharmacy, independent pharmacy over the last 5 to 10 years, the entire state of Iowa lights up. Because this has been, and this is being driven by consolidation of PBMs, which have been able to become massively profitable businesses. Not everybody knows this. PBMs have been so lucrative that one of them actually purchased CVS, the pharmacy company. So now CVS itself is owned by a PBM company. When you talk about where pressures are coming on pharmacists, it is coming from PBMs. I was really proud to vote in a bipartisan way a few years ago in support of PBM reform in our state, but we need national action as well. So it fundamentally comes down to this question of who do you see yourself, who do you work for? Who is your most important constituency? And for me, that is always going to be, like you said, patients, the folks who count on being able to get the medication that they need from a nearby pharmacy rather than having to drive 35, 45, 55 minutes into town to get access to life-saving medication. And then working in a practical way to try to find ways to find the balance between limiting costs for patients. Insulin is one that gets talked about pretty regularly, something that is life-saving medication for 250,000 Iowans, but is often very expensive. And so there's been, and I've heard from people, whether they're my age or older, who have had to face the challenges of accessing those medications at an affordable price. And so from my perspective, again, it fundamentally comes down to who are you working for? When you mentioned my time at Princeton, it was funny. It wasn't even a class that I was taking. One of my best friends from my program was taking the class, and he just would not stop talking about how great his professor was for reasons that became evident later. One of the things Stephen told me that he learned in that class and made a big impression on me was that there are a lot of people in government, legislators, people in the executive branch, who essentially think it is their job to represent the government to the people rather than representing the people to the government. And it is such a succinct idea, but it is so powerful. And that was exactly why in 2019, when these big companies came in and started buying mobile home communities and trailer parks, I took it upon myself. I wasn't getting deluged with emails, but I knew this was happening. And so I just took it upon myself to go canvass these communities, to go knock on doors in these communities that were acquired by this one company, to hear directly from my people about what was happening and what it was going to mean to them and to their families. I met a woman named Candy, a widow who lives in my district in Gulf View Mobile Home Park. A widow who's one of the last things that her late husband did was purchase her home, her trailer, so she could live a comfortable and economically secure retirement. I met Don, a quadruple paraplegic, who one of the last things that his parents did was help him purchase this home to accommodate what he needed with his disability. And just hearing from them and sitting with them and understanding the pain, their fear, and what it felt to be preyed on by this company through no fault of their own, had come in and was proposing these massive rent increases, is fundamentally being able to represent those stories, to understand that it is my job as an elected official to represent those stories, my constituents, to our government, to the Iowa Senate, to the U.S. Senate, hopefully. That's what I've always seen as my number one responsibility.
Let's take a short commercial break. Looking for a natural boost to keep your brain sharp and your body energized? Discover Everyday Dose, the ultimate coffee alternative packed with lion's mane and chaga mushrooms, collagen, and L-theanine. This creamy blend supports focus, mental clarity, and overall wellness without the caffeine jitters. But coffee is not your only option. Everyday Dose also offers a premium ceremonial-grade matcha sourced from Kagoshima, Japan, and infused with the same ingredients. Whether you go for the mushroom coffee or the matcha, Everyday Dose makes fueling your mind and body a breeze. Taken together, Everyday Dose has the potential to support memory, focus, sleep, nerve regeneration, gut health, immunity, and reduce inflammation, while the collagen gives you healthier skin, hair, nails, joints and bones. If you like, give either of these great products a try. Everyday Dose will send you a free starter kit when you purchase a 30-day supply of coffee or matcha tea. Just use my link to save, www.everydaydose.com/healthybrain, and make Healthy Brain in all capitals. With Everyday Dose, you can drink smarter, feel better, and power through your day naturally. I love this stuff. I do. I'm gonna have some right now. So you're running for the seat currently. You're young and handsome and articulate, and I'm just seeing you as the new generation politician. And so the question is, what is the new generation perspective that you believe is missing from the current Washington milieu as we approach, whether it's the healthcare crisis or other major hot button issues?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ken. I think when I talk to other people, so I was born in 1991, grew up essentially after the end of the Cold War and the very beginning of the global war on terror. And I talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the show, watching our country sucked into the Middle East during that war. I was in high school and then going into college when the global financial crisis hit, the Great Recession. I was still becoming politically aware, but started to see a number of these scandals break in Washington, D.C. around the Jack Abramoff scandal and these lobbying scandals, the corruption that was evident then. And then, of course, watch the rise of Donald Trump in 2016, which happened while I was at Princeton, which was it was an interesting time to be getting a degree in public policy during the 2016 campaign and the first Trump administration. And in setting aside the disagreements that I have with Donald Trump on policy, there certainly are many of those, but watching the way that he campaigned about basically challenging the establishment of Washington, D.C., that from his perspective had been failing a lot of ordinary Americans. When watching that resonate with so many people, it certainly was informative to me because Iowa is a state that had voted for Bill Clinton twice in the 90s, voted for Barack Obama twice in the 2000s, and then has now voted for Donald Trump in 3 consecutive presidential elections. There was clearly feeling that he was speaking to that was held by not necessarily a majority of Americans, but certainly by many people, including people who had previously been voting for Democratic candidates for office. And I think it is really important for Democrats to be clear-eyed about what his appeal was to a significant part of people who had previously been supporting Democratic candidates. And that was his perceived willingness to challenge the status quo and shake up the establishment. Now, again, I don't agree with Donald Trump on many issues, but I think it has certainly made a mark, I think, on people who are in the millennial generation who have watched, frankly, a lot of the failures of the kind of traditional establishment, whether that was the war in Iraq, whether that was the Great Recession. We look at what's happened since then with the COVID pandemic and some of the ongoing challenges that we are dealing with now around social media and increasingly around artificial intelligence. I think it is very clear today, probably more than in the past, that these entrenched interests really are responsible for a lot of the challenges that are facing our state, facing our country. And there's just a necessity, a basic requirement that you have to be willing to challenge that status quo. That's what I've tried to do in the state Senate, to do it in a way that can find common ground, because you can't do anything alone. That's the number one rule of politics, is you can't do anything alone. Democracy truly is the ultimate team sport. We have to be able to bring people together in order to make change happen. So I think from my perspective, it's that worldview. It is the belief that even though we may have profound disagreements on issues that I think are really important, there are other places where we do have agreement and where we can actually work together to move things forward. And I will also just tell you too, as someone who grew up, I think the term is digital native. Increasingly, a lot of these challenges are posed to us by these large tech companies, social media companies. And so being, I think, more fluent in how those technologies are utilized in many cases to divide, to distract our attention, our energy, is something that I think sets us apart in terms of how we view the problems that are facing our country.
As our listeners look to build their own healthy brain toolbox, and as we wrap up our interview today, what's the one policy change at the federal level that you believe would most improve the neurological and mental health of the American people?
That's a great question. I'm going to give it two answers because I think that they do have to work in a two-step solution. Basically, what I always talk about when we're on the campaign trail is that we just desperately need to overturn the Citizens United decision. And some of your listeners who are into politics or more legally minded may know that was the decision by our Supreme Court 16 years ago that essentially ushered in the modern age of American politics with these massive super PACs, the spending of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in some cases on Senate and presidential campaigns, increasingly in congressional level, U.S. House campaigns as well. I think that has really been to our detriment as society and certainly as our kind of our political health and culture. And frankly, I would say probably to all of our mental health too. You look at the impact of all of that, the media advertising, the toxicity of our politics, and how that contributes, I think, to a sense of dread or fear or hostility that many of us feel in our political lives. And that all, I think, really does stem back to that decision by the Supreme Court that kind of ushered this age in. So we need to overturn the Citizens United decision. We need to rebuild trust in our legislative members. I'm a strong supporter of common sense term limits, ending the ability of members of Congress to own or trade stock while they're in office. By the way, Ken, these are supported by vast majorities of Democrats, independents, and Republicans all over our country. And I think that if we're able to get that big money out of politics, get these to a place where they are not stoking division, stoking misrepresentation of other sides in our politics, I think that is going to significantly improve everybody's health, because our mental health, certainly when it comes to our politics, and it would, I think, also go a long ways towards beginning the process of curbing the influence that these economic giants have in our society. We need to bring back more competition, not less, in industry after industry. We need to make sure that we are actually encouraging innovation, encouraging competition in so many different places, healthcare and others. And then I think as we look to the future, there's been these are very early studies, but I think some very cautionary early studies on the effects of large language models, the use of generative chat AI interfaces on human development, on our cognitive abilities. And look, I'm someone who I use AI pretty regularly as a partner in trying to think through issues or summarize issues and learn. We also need to be very intentional about how we use these technologies, both in our personal lives and from a policy perspective, what the impacts are on our young people in particular, on our educational system, on our healthcare system, and so many other places. I think it is totally possible that these artificial intelligence models are going to wind up contributing in very positive ways to our future, to our lives. I think it is also quite possible that they lead to very catastrophic consequences that are very hard to predict until it is potentially too late. And as we think about the future, I think those two things do really go hand in hand.
Wonderful. Thank you for spending a better part of an hour. This has been a wonderful interview with U.S. Senate candidate from the state of Iowa, Zach Wahls. Wish you the very best on the campaign trail and a successful ride to the United States Senate to be part of your life journey and witness that.
Ken, I really appreciate it. And I just certainly say to anyone listening who wants to learn more, do not hesitate. You can just Google Zach Wahls. That'll get you to the right place. You can also just go to our website, zachwahls.com. That's ZACHWAHLS. Even though I'm running in the state of Iowa, this is obviously an election that will have profound consequences for our entire country. And so even if you don't live in the state of Iowa, but you're interested in supporting the campaign, we would welcome your help, whether that's financially, through volunteering, or just helping to spread the word by sharing more information about us. Every single piece of support that we receive goes a long ways. Thanks, Ken.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Ken Charlin here with the Healthy Brain Toolbox. I'd love to hear from you. If you have general questions about brain health, neurology, or the science of keeping your brain sharp, send them to questions@healthybraintoolbox.com. I'll be reading your questions on the upcoming episodes. Please remember, these need to be general questions. Can't answer personal medical questions or provide individual medical advice. So if you've ever wondered about brain health strategies, lifestyle tips, new research, or the future of neuroscience, send those questions in. I look forward to hearing from you, and who knows, you might even hear your question featured on the show. Thank you for tuning in to the Healthy Brain Toolbox podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you new insights to protect and nourish your brain. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone looking to take control of their health. Until next time, stay sharp and keep learning.